Welcome to today's GC Advantage webinar. My name is Bob Barker, and thanks for joining us today. The topic today is something that I'm going to be taking notes on myself. It's about time management and tips for General Counsel, as well as anyone who's attending today. So we're looking forward to covering this topic. Just a quick overview for those who may not be familiar with the firm. We help companies attract talent for any GC, CCO assignment, or for any lawyer who's reporting into the GC. We also provide leadership development services such as coaching and succession services, and then advising for both legal as well as compliance professionals. And the program today, the GC Advantage program, it's our complementary program to help legal and compliance leaders succeed by giving access to individuals such as those who are going to be speaking today. And hopefully you can join us in future ones as well. As far as the upcoming webinars, the next one is going to be about equity compensation. So everything from startup to public companies, what are the ins and outs for those who are in-house counsel, so they you get more exposure to the compensation packages, equity compensation packages. And today, please, bring us any questions. At the bottom of the Zoom app, you'll see an icon for questions. Just put them in there, and all the panelists will see them, and we'll do our best to answer some of them during the course of the webinar and at the tail end. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Maureen to kick things off here. I'll join you back at the end of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. So I'm Maureen Brundage. I'm a senior advisor with BarkerGilmore, providing coaching and advisory services to General Counsel and others on the legal team. I'm the former Executive Vice President, General Counsel, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Ethics Officer, lots of titles, at the Chubb Corporation. And prior to that, I was at the law firm of White & Case. So that's a little bit about me. I'm delighted today to have such two great speakers joining me on the panel. Jung Choi is General Counsel of the Outdoor Product segment of Vista Outdoor, which is a leading global designer, manufacturer of outdoor recreation products. She will be the General Counsel of Revelyst Outdoor upon the completion of the separation of the Outdoor Product segment from Vista, and Revelyst will become a standalone public company. Prior to joining Vista last year, Jung was General Counsel and Secretary of Box, an online wholesale retailer. And prior to that, she held various senior legal roles at Stanley Black & Decker and Bristol Myers Squibb. And she began her legal career as a corporate associate at Davis Polk. So welcome. We then have Dave Robinson, who is recently, and I mean recently, April 1, retired Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the Hartford, which is a Fortune 500 investment and insurance company. Dave joined the Hartford in 2006 and had served in a number of different roles, including the Enterprise Transformation Office Lead, before becoming GC in 2015. Luckily for me, that prior to the Hartford, Dave spent 5 years at Chubb in roles of increasing responsibility, including serving as interim general counsel until I joined, and then being my deputy general counsel. Prior to joining Chubb in 2000, Dave had a varied career. He was a commercial litigator at Day, Berry & Howard, now Day Pitney. He was an insurance underwriter and executive risk, and he was a senior tax consultant at Arthur Andersen, as well as being a law clerk for a U.S. District Court. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
We get right into the substance. I think everyone has a problem of not having enough time to do everything that you need to get done. I was joking before we began, that was sort of my morning, trying to get this done. It's like, oh, I have time to do five other things, and it sometimes doesn't work out that way. I think it's especially true for general counsels who are continually being asked to do more with less. There have been a number of recent surveys which support this. In the FTI Consulting 2023 GC report, the vast majority of GC survey reported experiencing increasing demands. Over 75% reported strains on legal department resources, budget, or capacity. In BarkerGilmore's 2024 survey of GCs and CLOs about their 2024 challenges, concerns were raised about needing to provide improved and broader services and still dealing with increased regulatory demands, but with smaller budgets. Similar results were found in the Association of Corporate Counsels 2024 CLO survey. A majority of the respondents reported that their budgets are shrinking while their workloads are increasing. To deal with this, many cited operational efficiency as a top strategic initiative. A foundational element of operational efficiency is time management. Peter Drucker, a noted management expert, said that, quote, until we can manage time, we can manage nothing else. Today, we're going to delve deeper into time management and provide some suggestions that we have for general counsels to do themselves and for their teams. But much of what we're going to talk about today will be applicable to everyone, both in your professional life and your personal life as well. To level set, what is time management? Time management is how we choose to use and organize our time. Pretty obvious. Good time management is consciously planning and controlling the amount of time we spend on specific tasks to increase our efficiency. Lawyers in particular seem to struggle with time management. One theory, and this is according to a recent National Law Review article, is that lawyers are trained to do all for everyone, always saying yes and overcommitting. And we're getting smiles. Having good time management skills really is important. It's essential for your job as a general counsel. Improving those skills will enable you to get more done and be more efficient. It also increases your confidence. It will free you up perhaps to take on and get involved in more strategic projects. And so to get out of being in the weeds sometimes, which doesn't enable you then to get involved in strategy and other parts of the business that you really want to get involved with. It also hopefully gives you more time to do stuff that you enjoy outside of work. Poor time management can have disastrous consequences. For example, missing a deadline can result in significant financial consequences for your company. For example, being late in filing a notice of appeal. It can harm your reputation. It also adds to your stress, which has been growing ever since the pandemic and beyond. Today, we're going to talk about things we think that will help you to improve your time management. We're not intending that you do everything that we say, and we were joking too that, do sometimes as they say, not as they do. And some of it is that there's so much out there, there's a lot written on it, and a lot of techniques and things that we're not going to even touch upon. But the bottom line is sort of do something. And so the idea is it's a trial and error to try different things to see what will work for you that would improve your time management. With that, I want to get my panelists involved. Dave, if you could give me your thoughts about why time management is important.
Well, let me start with an admission, which is that it's something I continue to work on. And while I'll share my thoughts, throughout the course of the hour, not to suggest that I can actually do all of these things. It's an ongoing battle, but I think it is critically important. And I think, listen, you mentioned it, Maureen. Lawyers are trained. Most of us, all three of us on this webinar, started our careers in private practice, and we all know lawyers get paid by the hour. Some would say lawyers get paid by the spoken word. So more hours is in most cases more revenue. So it's not a bad thing. When you get in-house, you realize that your CEO, your shareholder, your board are not paying you or judging you by how many hours you spend, but the results that you deliver. So for me, it's all about focusing on high value work and trying to minimize low value work and the time I spend on it. There's a book called Deep Work. It was written by a guy by the name of, I think, Newport, that taught, and I think it's called Deep Work. Deep work is concentrated, high return work versus shallow work, which is administrative work, emails, meetings, calls, those sorts of things. And it's all about how do you create as much time and discipline around deep work and minimize the time around shallow work. And people will say that shallow work keeps you employed because it is work that keeps the trains moving, but it's deep work that gets you promoted. And one other thing I'll throw out, Warren Buffett is known for saying that the difference between successful people and very successful people is very successful people say no to almost everything. So I think when you're in private practice, you never say no to a client. If they're willing to pay you to wash their car and you can bill them for it, you're going to wash your car. When you get in-house, you don't want to do that. You want to focus on the work that really matters. And I found, as hard as it is to do and for your teams to do, saying no or not saying yes to everything is your greatest weapon in terms of doing deep work, focused work that really returns value to the enterprise.
I think later in the discussion, we hopefully will have time to get deeper into how to say no. But Jung, to get you into the conversation, what's your thoughts about the importance of time management?
Yeah, I think I'm 100% agree with everything that Dave said. I think the other element that we just have to be realistic about is, as Maureen was saying, we are operating in an environment where there are continually more demands on GCs and our teams with less resources. And that means that, whether we like it or not, we have to straddle between, the high level strategy as well as really digging into the detail oriented work, because frankly, someone has to do the work, right? I think we are moving away from that period where, if you kind of were a high level GC, you could essentially just delegate, not necessarily dive into the details. Now you really have to do both. So I think time management then becomes even more important because you have to be extremely choiceful about that allocation of time. And you do have to make choices in terms of when to flex between the high level as well as the detail orientedness. Because as a GC, you do have to get into the details, more than you would probably like, because you're responsible for a department. And also just from a resourcing perspective, I think that that's kind of the way that, legal departments have been, changing.
Right. So let's try to talk about some ways that we would suggest to improve time management. I'll begin with the basic that has worked from time to time for me is creating a list. I'm big on lists. All the things that you need to do, but also all the things you are in fact doing, which sometimes you may be surprised, what you're spending your time on. We all have had the situation, we come to the end of the day and we have, what the heck did I accomplish today? What did I do? So I think having it can be very helpful. It's also great if you can actually scratch off something on your list that you actually have done. We also tend not to be that good of realizing how much time we're spending on a given task. Therefore, I would recommend creating what I would call a task time log. It's recording everything that you're doing for at least 2 weeks and how much time you're spending on it. And this should include administrative tasks and not all the big strategic projects. It's everything you're doing. I think this is valuable for a GC to do and also to have your teams do as well. Now, I can hear the groans from the participants because all of us went in-house, or many of us went in-house to avoid time tracking. But I'm not suggesting that you have to do it forever, that you do it again 2 weeks, maybe a month. Dave may recall that I did this when I first joined Chubb, and I really found it was very helpful to me, but I think it was also helpful for the members of the team for them to step back and realize what they're spending time on. In that case, one big takeaway was non-disclosure agreements. People were spending an inordinate amount of time and didn't even know it. So I think there can be a lot of lessons from that. So Jung and Dave, do you track your team's time? Have you done time audits? Any thoughts on any of this? Jung, do you want to begin?
Sure. So I don't track my team's time per se because, I want to be mindful of not micromanaging and dictating, how my team allocates and prioritizes their time. But I do think it's a good idea to talk regularly with team members about the issues that have been occupying the majority of their time. And generally, if those items line up with, the most important deliverables at the company, and I think a good way to gauge that is, have you heard about it? Are the other leadership members talking about it? Is the CEO focused on it? Then that I take that as a sign that time is being, appropriately managed. If not, I'd want to have deeper discussions about what help they needed from me in order to help better understand priorities. Because as a GC, I think that's one of the most helpful things we can do for our teams is just help them understand what the priorities are, and so that they can help better prioritize their time.
And I guess I followed your example, Maureen, back at Chubb. So we don't track time at the Hartford, but we have done time studies. I think in my tenure at the company, and certainly a couple of these took place while I was GC, we did limited time audits. So some for as short as 2 weeks, some for as much as 2 months. And there are lots of tools, technology tools out there that make it really easy. There are prompts, drop-down windows that come up every 10 minutes that allow you to just say, what are you doing now? And that's a random sampling. So people are not tracking their time throughout the day. And then other ones where you are actually doing the old-fashioned tracking your time each day and reporting it. And we found those to be, one, you got to promise your staff that this is not going to become permanent, just a window in time, and sign your name in blood. But people will buy into it, and will give it a try because they don't want to be wasting their time, and they all feel overworked and too many tasks, so they want help at kind of managing that. And we found that one of the biggest time killers was context shifting that goes on during the course of the day. We're all subject to being interrupted at all times during the day. And if you get interrupted while you're working on something, it takes time to move your brain to that new thing, and certainly it takes time for your brain to move to the task you were interrupted by. And that's just sheer loss of time. It also allows you to find pockets of activity that just doesn't have a great value. So we would often say, when doing these time studies and looking at the data, we're not looking for ways to do things faster or necessarily do more things. We're looking at what doesn't need to be done at all. And then we went through a mechanism. This is something I try and live by to this day, which is, especially because we're all heavily governed or managed by our email inbox, I try to take it, whether it's in paper or electronic, I touch it once mentality. If I touch it, I'm either going to do it, I'm going to take care of it, address it and complete it. I'm going to delegate it to somebody. I'm just going to delete it because it doesn't matter. Or a rare case where I'll say, I'm going to defer it. I've sort of quickly assessed it. this is going to require a significant amount of time. I'm going to defer it to later. And then the last thing I'd say is I'm a big one for keeping lists as well, to-do lists. But what I find is if I don't calendar it, it's just wishful thinking on my part that I'm
Right.
actually getting done. So I try not to be managed by my inbox, but I do try and be managed by my calendar. And I, put the things that I need to get done go in my calendar.
Right. I even now put, if I have a deadline in my calendar, I will put in my calendar like a week ahead that deadline is coming in your calendar because I need her because having it the day of, it's like, oh God, this is so I have to remind myself that it's important. I don't do it for every single thing, but obviously important deadlines. One thing that both of you talked about is prioritizing. So great, we have these lists. You've done your time studies. You've had the conversations. But Jung, you mentioned like even working with your team. So the issue is how you prioritize. So often a term that's used is important. Or Dave, I noticed you used high value, right? So it's trying to come up with what really is important. And the one example I give, if somebody is standing in your doorway demanding that you do something right away and now, right, that's not necessarily important or high value to you. It may be important to that individual because they want to get it off their plate, but you really need to step back and figure out how to determine what's quote important, what's high value. I would suggest it should be high value important to you and your goals, and hopefully those two are tied to the goals and strategic objectives of your company. But I'd like for the two of you to weigh in. Dave, for you to begin, how do you think about high value important?
Yeah, so for me, obviously, it starts with the goals of the enterprise, then of my boss, the CEO, and then third is the goals of the department. Where does the department need to make progress? And then it's about keeping a scorecard and keeping it visual. So I'd sit down at the beginning of every year, like all of us, with the CEO, and go over what are my goals for the year. And I'd probably come in, and my goals are obviously built off of his goals, but I'd come in with 10 goals, and he would add 10 more, and you're up to 20, and you'd finally land on what makes sense. I don't think I've ever said this to him, but I would then take his list of 20 and really cull it down to the 5 or 6 that I knew were most important. And I would keep it visible. I would literally have it written down on my desk. It would be the one piece of paper that didn't move off my desk, as just a constant reminder of what really matters. There are always going to be crises that push that to the side, but hopefully are pushing it to the side temporarily. So you just got to find different tricks to keep those priorities front and center. Another thing I do a lot is I'll put those priorities, some typically not for the year, but for a couple week period or a month. I'll put it in an email and send it to myself. Now, why do I do that? Because I'm looking at my inbox every day, all day long. And if I constantly see that email to myself, and I sometimes resend it to get it back up to the top of your inbox, it just becomes a bit of a nag, undeniable nag, to constantly be reminded what are the high priority items for this week, this month, this year.
Right. Jung?
Yeah, so in terms of importance, I guess, and this follows on from Dave's point, and there's a terminology for all of these terms, but I do think the general kind of, 80-20% rule, where 80% of outcomes are based on 20% of inputs, I find that a good, theory to kind of keep in the back of my head, because you're right, Dave, we as in-house lawyers are not compensated by time, but by the value of outputs and how meaningful it is to the company. So I think just keeping that at the back of your mind, for me, importance would probably be 3 things. One, is it important to your CEO and leadership team? Two, how important is it to strengthening the P&L of the company, whether it's bringing in revenue, is in an offensive case that can potentially bring in revenue, improving margins, avoiding a liability, especially if you're on the defensive side. And then third is, does the issue have a strategic impact that furthers the long-term goals of your company? And that would be something like, being part of an international expansion project that won't happen overnight, but it's clearly important to the long-term vision of the company. So I would, characterize those things as important. For me, it's I feel like whether it's something as formal as, an Eisenhower matrix, which we'll talk about, is creating that task list and marking it urgent or important. I think it helps clarify the important things that need to be done urgently versus the things that need time commitment, whether it's talent development, relationship building. I may have more control over the timing, but I also need to be very deliberate about carving out time to make sure that they get done, because those require investments of time over the longer run. And so again, and that also, I think, forces me to think about what is truly urgent, which then ties back to, the question of clear definitions of what's important.
Right, that's great. And Jung already mentioned the Eisenhower matrix, which of all the techniques in doing the research for this that I came upon, I thought this one resonated. And it sounds like it's one that from Dave, what you talked about as well, it's probably something that you actually do. And I just need to exit. This method, the Eisenhower matrix, it's attributed to many people, including at the time General Eisenhower, while serving as a supreme commander of the Allied forces in World War II. It helps organize and prioritize tasks based on urgency and importance. You using the list of tasks that you have for yourself, or if you're doing it for your team, you create a 2x2 matrix. So you wind up having 4 quadrants, and you put the task in the quadrants. Things in the upper left quadrant are urgent and important, or they may be the most urgent and most important. And these are things that you need to do right away and should be done first. Things in the upper right quadrant are important but not urgent. These need to get done, but you can decide when you get them done. So it's something you can decide upon. Things in the lower left quadrant are urgent but not important. You can delegate these, or I believe in some cases, just not do them at all. Things in the lower right are not urgent and not important, or least urgent and least important. And these are things you should eliminate or delete entirely. If you want to get fancy, you could rejigger this and do a heat map where you have the x-axis is important and the y-axis is to make it work. So obviously, urgent and important are things that need to be a top priority. I found it interesting, and I think what I'm going to say is consistent, Jim, with things you just said. There's a leadership advisor, Mark Nevins, in a 2023 Forbes article. He remarked that the most challenging items are those that are in the important but not urgent or least urgent. By this, I think he means that we have trouble getting to them, even though they're important, but they don't have like a deadline or a near-term deadline. And examples of this, and this all resonated with me, is innovation, professional development, career management, and personal matters, including like exercise and health. We always seem to be putting off like training programs or going to networking events, or sometimes even doctor's appointments, because we're focusing on a work matter that has a deadline. So we do that first. And we do this because there isn't a deadline or a near-term one, or it can be rescheduled, so I can just do it at a later time. But again, it doesn't mean that those things do not need to get done. Again, they are important. And according to Nevins, the people who are the most effective at getting things done plan and devote meaningful time to activities in this important but not urgent quadrant. And he maintains that we spend too much time working on things in their wrong quadrant. I'd like to get, both of your views on this. Have, on the Eisenhower metrics, whether you used it or used it without realizing it, which I think was my case when it was at Chubb. And how do you prioritize work? And some of you, I think both have touched upon this a bit already about how you prioritize, but any thoughts you have on this?
Happy to comment first, Maureen.
Sure.
I think it is helpful. I think I've used it somewhat intuitively. I do try to do it, delegate it, delete it, defer it approach. I think, listen, the things that appear in the green box are urgent and important, pretty easy to identify. So, large M&A opportunity that's got a tight timeline around it, that's urgent and important. It's going to move the needle for the organization. You're in a bidding process and so forth. I've dealt with activist shareholders in the stock. That is both an urgent and important. I've dealt with unsolicited hostile offers to purchase the company. Obviously urgent and important, going to get the attention of the CEO, the board, and all our major stakeholders. The delete it box, it's not important and it's not urgent. That too, I think, is pretty easy to identify for the most part. It's the other two boxes that are tough. The important but not urgent always gets pushed to the back burner, and trying to keep that on the front burner. That's where I rely on calendaring, time commitments around those things. And I find the toughest one is, it's urgent, but it's not important. That, because you mentioned it, Maureen, somebody else's urgency is not your urgency. But it can take a little bit of investigatory work to figure out, okay, I get it, it's urgent, but to figure out that it's not really that important. And I often say to people, nobody calls the GC with good news. It's always, you pick up the phone and somebody's got a problem, and now it's your problem. But I find, you walk into your office on a Monday morning, and you look at your desk or your email in most cases, and you're like, wow, there are 5 out of control fires on my desk right now. But when you dig into it a little bit, you realize, well, wait a minute, 2 of these are just smoke. It may never be a fire, and 2 of them, they're somebody else's fire. They're not mine, or not mine yet. So then you quickly narrow it down to, okay, there's only really 1 out of control fire on the desk, and that's the one that's going to get your attention.
Yeah. I mean, to Dave's point, and, some of the things that you talked about in terms of, sure, activism, bits for the company. I'm, sort of living through that now. And so I think this is also fluid in terms of, there will be periods where through no amount of planning that you could do will necessarily be able to dictate kind of what you're facing with, and whether that's, external factors. And so I think, there might be periods where you are kind of stuck in that important, urgent box, and you will be for, an extended period of time, because that's just what your company is going through. I think for me, the important thing is knowing that your company is in that box with your remaining time, to the extent you have any. How do you carve out any time for the important, not urgent? Or you might just very well make the active decision that now is not the time, and I will have to dedicate more time later. But I think being deliberate and intentional about that decision, in terms of, I realize that given the circumstances facing me, I cannot dedicate time to this now, but I need to and will do it, because if you don't, then things like talent development, relationship building, those don't happen on their own, right? And then, to your point on that urgent but not important, I think it comes down to, your relationship with your business clients. And again, I think this is somewhat situational in terms of, what is your relationship like? And, I think a lot of the times, Dave, you do have to dig in, and that takes a fair amount of time and diligence, even understanding the issue. But I do think that once you've developed that relationship, we GCs and legal people, I do think that we are pretty good about saying no in the right way. And so, saying no in terms of, right, I'm not going to be fully on board with your project, but what are some of the things that I can do to help? Is it a resourcing issue? In which case, can we talk about how best to fill that need? Is it, putting some structure around a project because you are really unclear about even the questions to ask? And I think just being that, providing those kinds of inputs can go a long way when you're essentially, it's saying, no, but I'll be helpful in trying to help you get to the right answer and outcome.
We've gotten a couple of questions about tools, whether for doing this matrix or the time management, time tracking thing, Dave, we talked about. I don't know if off the top of your head you can think of some tools, or we could just get back to the people who raised the question separately with names of tools that people have used.
Yeah, so I know one of the tools we've used, I don't know if we used them for the time study, but I think we did, is a company called Onit, ONIT. And I think they had time tracking tools, but I know we've utilized the Hartford's utilized them to develop a legal service request form. So, a lot of the requests made of the law department these days comes in through email. So instead of people typing out an email with their question, they actually use this tool, and it has all the same flexibility of an email, but it allows us to keep track of the requests that are coming into the law department. There's a little bit of artificial intelligence built into it, so it can artificially decide who's the best lawyer, compliant person to respond to this request. Now, the manager can always go in and reassign, but the tool says this person has the expertise, and everybody else in the group got the last 5 requests, so I'm going to give it to the 6th person so they don't get overwhelmed. So there are lots of tools out there like it. There's also a tool that I know my CEO used, which actually takes his calendar, and I think Microsoft has this capability, and can actually tell you at the end of a day, week, month, quarter, how much time are you spending in meetings, how much time are you spending on email. The CEO uses one that's more advanced that says how much time is he spending with each stakeholder group, how much time is he talking to analysts, to shareholders, to employees, to agents and brokers, to regulators. And he looks at that and compares it to his own goals and time management at the beginning of the year, and can sit back, he and his assistant, and say, all right, we got to spend more time with shareholders because we didn't achieve the 20% or whatever we were looking to spend. So I can't give you all the tools, but there are tons of tools out there, and more coming by the day.
Great. One thing that we've talked about and is in the matrix is delegation and the importance to delegate, which I think is crucial from a time management perspective. Although we may be able to do something, or we believe, better and faster than somebody else, not everything needs or should be done by you or requires your attention. But you need to delegate effectively. You need to know who's capable of doing certain tasks, so you can give it to them. You need to oversee the work without micromanaging it. And you have to appreciate that delegating doesn't mean it's off your everything is off your table forever. You have to keep an eye on it, etc. Jung, if you could share your views about delegation.
Sure, and this is definitely something that I've had to work on throughout my career. But the more the longer I've been doing this, delegation is really key, because as we all progress throughout our careers, the only way we can truly be effective is by leveraging our team. Delegating, I think, also builds a lot of trust and also enhances our own leadership skills. I would say, for me, it's being deliberate about what topics to delegate and the process by which to do so. For instance, depending on the task, will you delegate specific tasks versus entire projects? How involved do you want to stay? Do you want to be copied on all emails? Do you want regular report outs? Do you want touching base at critical points? And, frankly, for me, it's also recognizing that there's some things that no matter kind of how detail oriented it is, I won't fully delegate. For instance, as it involves the board. And that was because I actually had a learning from a, not great experience when, we were preparing for an in-person board meeting after COVID, and it'd been some time since everyone had gotten together for an in-person meeting. Management spent so much time on the content of the meeting that not enough time went into thinking of the logistics in terms of the technical setup, the seating in an unfamiliar space. And when we ended up having difficulties, it was extremely disrupted and took away from the board's focus on content. And in our roles, as the general counsel, corporate secretary, we often do have to play coordinator, even if you have a tech support team, even if you have, travel support, and to make sure that the details are taken care of, whether that's travel schedules, technical support, even the room temperature. So I think there's just that element where, no matter how much, which comes back to just be mindful of where to delegate, and then be very specific about your comfort level in terms of the process by which you're going to do so.
One thing that makes,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Dave, no, in the interest of time, one of the things that makes delegation harder is the tendency for many of us to be perfectionists or having that tendency. And the importance of needing to determine what just needs to get done versus what needs to be perfect. What's good enough to get a passing grade and what needs to get an A+. We all know, and I've quoted ad nauseum, Sheryl Sandberg, that done is better than perfect. And I think, Dave, you alluded to the fact that we were all at law firms. I think you tend to become perfectionists when you've been in a law firm because your clients are paying ridiculous fees, so they expect perfect. When you go in-house, they want it done, they don't want perfect. I guess, Dave, what's your views on that and any insights?
Yeah, so I was smiling at Jung's board story because I don't know a GC who hasn't felt that perfection is the enemy of good, and we strive for progress, not perfection, except when it comes to the board. And it often seems like the board requires perfection right down to the temperature of a room or whether the steak was well done or not. And that's why
you mean the concierge services.
Absolutely. And that's why I quickly delegated the corporate secretary role to somebody else, because I didn't want to work on travel plans, but it all flows back to corporate secretary and general counsel. If there's a problem with the board, you're going to hear about it. Yeah. But even they are pretty good. They'll make the comment, but they understand what's important, what's not. But listen, I think fighting the tendency of lawyers, compliance professionals, government relations people, these are all very talented people. They take their roles incredibly seriously. They're all service-oriented professionals. Fighting their tendency of perfection is very, very hard. Fighting my own tendency for perfection, very, very hard. It's born out of a fear of failure, which can be a good thing most of the time, but it can consume hours like there's no tomorrow. Somebody once said, you can do anything. You can do anything once you stop trying to do everything. Yep. And I think that's a really good motto, and it cuts across what we've been talking about. I think it is really trying to demonstrate to staff, to myself, what requires perfection, and there are very few things that do, and what is good is good enough. It's funny, the CEO of the Hartford is a very one of the best CEOs I've ever been around. His name is Chris Swift. Swift is his last name, and he walks around saying, "I didn't get that name by accident." Speed counts, and perfection, it can be the enemy of speed. We spent a lot of time, coaching, helping staff understand when is good enough, and most importantly, making sure that we have their back when somebody wants to take issue with a good outcome. So I think that's very important, that they don't feel like they're going out on a limb alone. If they've done 80% of the work, given the recommendation, and then move forward.
Yeah, I think it's a
Think you
combination
both-
of, oh, go ahead. Yeah, two things
Yeah.
on the perfectionism. One is kind of what are the consequences of not getting this perfectly right? And if you ask yourself that question, I think most of the time, Dave, as you said, if something's a little off, you're frankly the only person who probably even noticed, right? I think the other part of it is building a culture and mentality among your teams. And I learned this from myself, where, every time I made a mistake or didn't think I delivered as well on a result as I could have, I would replay that again and again in my head. And I'm seeing Dave, nod, because I think we all have a tendency to do that. And it was frankly just taking up so much focus, time, emotional energy. It was preventing me from moving on to the next thing. So I think creating a culture where you instill to your team members, it's okay to make a mistake, it's okay to fail, but you better learn something from that and apply it to the next thing, because otherwise the failure is not particularly productive, right? So I think just instilling that mentality and making sure that your team feels comfortable with that, I think can go a long way.
One thing that I think both of you have alluded to, and it came up on the prep call, and a lot of people think that, a good time management skill is to be a great multitasker. And I grew up being told that, but a lot of the research of late says that first of all, that you're not really multitasking, you're switching from one thing to the other, and that there's a switch cost. And I think, Dave, it was you that alluded to it, that you're in effect probably being less efficient because you're switching back and forth and perhaps not doing either of the things you're doing better. There was a recent article by New York Times opinion piece by Oliver Berkman. He didn't waste his time to give his opinion about multitasking. The title of the article is "Stop Multitasking." No, really, just stop it, which I think speaks volumes. He talks a bit about that we're addicted to trying to do multiple things at a time. And there's been a lot of articles about the fact that technology now, so you can be on a Zoom call and you can be checking your phone and listening to a podcast or whatever it is, that we have a tendency to do that. But again, a lot of the research is that you would be much better off focusing on one thing at a time and getting stuff done. There was another author, Anna Borges, talked about, and the reality of life is maybe we're forced to multitask a lot, that you get interrupted and things happen, but that to be more deliberate about when you're switching from one to the other. So that if you're in the middle of reading an article, I'll check my email, finish the article before you check your email, that you really need to think about it a bit more. I know we're going to be pressed for time, but to get, Dave, your views about multitasking.
Look, I'll give you one example. As a property casualty insurer, we write commercial and personal line auto policies. And you know what the most dangerous technological development ever put into a car? And it was going to the automatic transmission. Because if you give a human being a free hand, they're going to use that hand, whether it's eating a sandwich, putting on makeup, or using a smartphone. And that has led to an increase in accidents. So we like to think we can multitask. We can't. You are degrading your performance on the thing you should be focused on while you're trying to get something else done at the same time. So it's something I try and force myself to do, is to focus. And listen, in this age of change, whether it's AI or just every industry, the speed at which things are innovating, it's the focus players, it's the focus companies, it's the focus employees that are going to be successful. So I go back to, I try not to be managed by my email. I do try and be managed by my calendar, and I build in focus time into my calendar as best I can. Then that's the tool I found most successful.
Yes, I always block work periods on my calendar, just to even just, I don't have a meeting or a call, but I'm just blocking time because I actually have to get something done. And to let if you have an assistant know, okay, the CEO can interrupt, but otherwise, no one else interrupt me.
I've even had
We've
my assistant walk into my office with a little post-it to make it like I make my assistant be the bad guy and like, you gotta go. And so she'll come in, 5 minutes before the meeting's time is up, and it'll always go long because I always make it go long. She'll come in 10 minutes after. And then I can say, guys, I gotta take this call, or I gotta take this meeting. It just forces me to protect that time.
During our discussion, a number of times we talked about the importance of saying no, and we've gotten some questions on that. So the issue is, and I think we all have had experience of people asking legal or lawyers to do stuff that really is not our role. I've had them ask me because they want to be able to say no, but they want to be able to say legal said no, or we're good writers, or we're good project managers. So, sorry, I get a lawyer to do it because they'll get it done. So, Jung, how do you say no to one of your business colleagues, and what if it's the CEO, or how do you say later to the CEO? Any suggestions?
Yeah, so again, I think this depends a bit on timing and kind of the strength of your relationship. So for instance, when you're starting a relatively new role, I think it's important that you build those relationships. And so you might be a bit more willing to step in, be involved in things that later you might be able to kind of say no to, because you're able to build that foundational relationship. And I think it comes back to, is the project important, right? And if it is, then frankly, I think even if it's beyond a legal role, then it's probably beneficial to have a level of involvement. And then, it comes back to, what exactly is the input being sought? Is it because is it a resourcing issue? It's because they don't have a project manager, or they, want someone who is a good writer. Like what exactly is the input being sought? Because I think if you're able to work with the business partner, and hopefully you have a good relationship on, I'm going to try to help you solve your problem, but let's dig into what exactly do you need from legal, and breaking it down like that, and force them to articulate what exactly they need. I think that can help. And it reframes it in terms of, I'm not saying no, I'm just trying to help you help yourself in terms of what resourcing you need. And maybe that's a conversation with HR or IT. So I've often found that, the saying no, again, I think it requires a bit of investment, if you will, Dave, in terms of figuring out exactly what is the question being asked and what is the input sought. But, unfortunately, as GCs, I think we also get a lot of those, which collectively add up to a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just building on that, I absolutely agree. A lot of it starts with the relationship you have with your internal clients, and that can go a long way to helping you to manage the process of saying no. I think some of it, just a quick and dirty way that we do it a lot, I do it a lot, is if you ask the client, oftentimes they're coming to you as a half-baked matter.
Yes.
They don't have the information. So asking them a bunch of questions. Well, if you could come back to me once you figured out or have these details.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, all of a sudden, something that's urgent, as soon as you put the task on them, it's not urgent anymore.
Right.
It's not as urgent as it was before.
And I think that's why they come to us, because we are, frankly, we help them navigate through the many questions they had, a really murky half-baked plan, and help them find some structure and process. So, and frankly, I do think that's an important role that we as lawyers can play. But that's not saying no. It's, putting some of the onus back on them to take a little more responsibility and making sure that they come to you with specific asks. And I think those are slightly different, but, a way that you can kind of defer the time commitment, if you will.
Yeah, and I think there are structural things that we've done as well, especially in a large organization. Law is one of the few places where in many companies, the lowest level, and these are valuable employees, frontline employees can all of a sudden reach into the law department, access somebody who, before they joined the company, were billing their time out at 800, 1,000, $1,500 an hour. And yet, a 25-year-old is calling them with a frontline problem. So we've instituted a process where, no. It needs to go up the business chain of command, your question, your concern, before it kicks over to the law department, because these are just expensive resources and they're more scarce than salespeople or underwriters or claims individuals. So structure can help you do that. I haven't figured out a good way to say no to the CEO. So if somebody got one out, I'm all ears. That's a little tougher. Although there are ways you can with senior business leaders agree up front. These are the priorities for the year.
Right.
When
Right.
another big priority gets added, you can go back to that list with that business person and say, okay, we're going to do this for sure. What of these existing priorities drops off the list?
Right.
Right. And I think that's important to do, to circle back and have that discussion and not just be added, that you try to see how they reprioritize. And the same thing about people coming to you with business things. Again, it may be a priority for that business person, but is it even a priority for their business that they're doing that? So that your thing, Dave, about going up that chain is really important. We have very little time left and a lot to cover that we haven't. One big thing is technology, and lots of discussion of late about AI and how obviously it's a lot of work for legal departments, but a lot of you that there's a lot of potential for benefits in terms of operations for legal. So for both of you to comment about technology in general and AI in particular, I think for many it may be still early on AI and more to come on that, but just to get your insights on that for legal departments. Jung, do you want to begin?
Sure. So obviously, I think it's early days. There is a tremendous benefit. But, one, I think the biggest benefit of where AI can be used is trying to automate those repetitive tasks. And whether it's calendaring or, we are weighed down so much by email. And I think just even having and being familiar with resources, Outlook does a pretty good job. I definitely have not mastered the, art of filtering and, but there's tremendous, and I think really with the goal of if you can automate some of those repetitive tasks, it would really free up a lot of other time. At one of my companies, the company's HR department did embark on an initiative where they would track people's times based on Outlook as well as, time spent on the computer. Obviously, that has a whole range of privacy and other employee management concerns. But I think just making, in terms of, can the company get some of this data to help, its employees be more productive? I've heard a number of companies going that initiatives. I think for the legal department, even something like note taking, I've heard of some really, interesting tools out. You run into confidentiality and how safe is the data type issues. So early days, I think there's tremendous benefit, but quite frankly, being the legal department, I'm probably going to wait a little bit to see, how things shake out before being a frontline adopter.
Yeah, my sense in the conversations and things I've read around AI is, listen, the practice of law, and compliance and government affairs are ripe for opportunities for AI and generative AI to make a difference, because the beauty of those large language models is digestion of huge amounts of information, their ability to summarize that information. That is a lot of what lawyers and compliance professionals do. But there are a lot of very smart, innovative companies that are running at that hard to come up with a tool that they can sell across a broad swath of the legal community. So for us to, at the Hartford, for the Hartford to spend time focused on that, which is not unique to us, it just didn't seem to make sense. So, the Hartford's spending a lot of time watching the tools that are getting developed. And when it makes sense to quickly ingest and to utilize those tools.
That's great. And we had a lot more things to talk about, and we also got a number of questions that we were not able to answer. It just shows how important time management is, including for webinars. But I see Bob is on the screen, so it means that we've come to the end of our time. So Bob?
Since we just have a minute, first of all, again, thank you for all participating today and sharing your insights. And those who participated in the audience, again, thank you. And we want to make this program and continue to make it as valuable as possible for everyone. We do have a 1-minute survey for those who signed up. If you please take a moment to give us that feedback, it would be greatly appreciated. And obviously, if there's anything we can do to help in your personal situation from a career and help you advance your career with coaching, help you attract talent for your organization, feel free to reach out to any of us. And on that, we look forward to having you join us again in the future. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.